بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم نحمده ونصلي ونسلم على النبي الكريم وبعد. Honorable brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah, we are very honored and privileged to be in the company of Professor Jonathan A.C. Brown. Just a little bit about his intro, inshallah ta'ala, of our tonight's speaker. Professor Jonathan Brown is a prominent American scholar and author of many books. Professor Brown completed his Bachelor of Arts in History, graduating from Georgetown University in year 2000. He then pursued advanced studies in Islamic thought, earning his doctorate from the University of Chicago in 2006. His academic journey included extensive research and study in countries such as Egypt, Syria, Turkey, Morocco, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Indonesia, India, Iran, not Bangladesh? Not yet. No, okay. All right. In 2010, Professor Brown joined Georgetown University as an associate professor in the Edmund A. Walsh School of Foreign Service. He holds the Al-Walid bin Talal Chair of Islamic Civilization at Georgetown University. Additionally, he serves as an advisor to the Yaqeen Institute for Islamic Research, where he formerly held the position of Director of Research. Professor Brown's scholarly work encompasses a wide range of topics with Islamic studies, including the history and development of Hadith literature, Islamic legal traditions, and the interplay between Islam and modernity. His notable publications include the canonization of Al-Bukhari and Muslim, the formation and function of the Sunni Hadith canon, is an in-depth analysis of how the Hadith collection of Bukhari and Muslim became a central to Islam and Muslims. He also has a book called Hadith, Muhammad's Legacy in the Medieval and Modern World. It's a comprehensive introduction basically to Hadith tradition, exploring its historical development and contemporary relevance. He has a book called Muhammad, a very short introduction. It's a concise biography of the Prophet ﷺ, examining his life and impact on world history. He has another book called Misquoting Muhammad, the challenge and choices of interpreting the Prophet's legacy. That is the topic of our tonight topic, inshallah ta'ala, exploration of the complexities involved in interpreting Islamic texts and the Prophet's teaching. Recently, when I say recently, in 2019, he wrote a book called Slavery and Islam, and again, examination of the history and ethics of slavery within the Islamic tradition. And very recently, in 2022, he wrote a book called Islam and Blackness, an analysis of the relationship between Islam and concepts of race, particularly focusing on blackness. And he has many other books, but these are some of the books that are in my knowledge, therefore I mentioned them. Tonight's talk, as I said to you, is a lot to do with from his book called Misquoting Muhammad. So inshallah ta'ala, I'm going to hand over to the professor, and I believe that he's going to be using some slides as well. And for the questions, you could write your questions down, and if you want, you could pass the questions to me, and I will ask him at the end. And we'll assess the situation at the end. If possible, we'll pass the mic around so that you could also ask questions as well. For the sisters, we have our volunteers of Hiba and Saba, or Sister Rizmi, if she's there, anybody, if you could raise your hand and show yourself to the sisters, and they could basically, you could ask to send the question to them in writing only, please, and they have my number, and they will send the question to me, and then I will read the question to the professor, and he will answer, inshallah ta'ala. And don't forget, after all that, we have food as well, so we are here for a long time. Okay, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Faddal.
This work. السلام عليكم. والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Thank you for inviting me. I'm so happy. I love coming to the UK. It's for Americans, it's kind of like going to the mothership. At least white Americans, I don't know. Maybe other people like maybe Irish Americans don't like being here, but it's always interesting. And I like going to different parts of London and meeting Muslims in the UK because they have so much passion. Passion is very important. You cannot do anything if you don't have passion. And passion and commitment are very important things. I was actually talking to Patrick earlier about this topic of like how you express blackness in different African languages. So it was really interesting. That was in my book on solving blackness. If I had a copy, I'd give it to you, but I don't have any copies because I don't walk around with copies of my books. So, by the way, this topic is kind of like adult. I'll try and make it not as not adult as possible, but it involves marriage and stuff like that. So, I don't know. I let my kids listen to everything. So I think, but I'm not making people think I'm a bad parent. I don't see a ton of kids, but if you're worried about your kids getting like upset or something, I don't know. I'm not sure what's gonna happen. Usually people get upset when I talk, so you know what I mean. Things are inevitable. I also removed a bunch of the pictures, even though I think they're actually really cool historical pictures because somebody got offended in the pictures before, so I was like, I'm gonna take these out. This topic really interests me. I think it's so, you know what really interests me? Because, not only because I find it intellectually interesting, but because it's really pertinent, like it really bothers a lot of Muslims. Like it's a huge issue. There's a couple of like big issues that Muslims are always either being confronted about or confronted themselves about or anxious over. It causes a lot of people to have like crises in their iman. And this is one of them. So that's why I think it's very relevant. I'm not just trying to come at you with some topic that's controversial or just for the sake of controversy or like excitement. No, this is something. The reason I studied this topic is because of the number of times Muslims came to me and said, "This is a huge issue. I can't deal with this issue." And so that's why I'm talking about this, not because I just like talking about controversial things. Everybody with me so far?
Yeah, just once.
Yeah, the thing is, it looks red. You know, red lights,
Not good. Green light, good.
that looks good. That was green. That's a very full battery. Okay, so it's a really big audience, by the way. I'm impressed. There's like 5 people in the audience.
We have
Let's say one time
women upstairs as well.
I gave a talk and there was nobody in the audience, so I just left. The worst though is if there's one person, because then you like can't really leave, but then it's sort of like just like a discussion between you and the person. That's the worst. This is good. This is really good turnout for me. I'm very happy with you. Thank you for making me feel good about myself. Okay, so if you don't know, this is all based on this question of the Prophet ﷺ, his marriage to Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha. And there are a number of well-known hadiths that basically it's one tradition, but there's different narrations of it, different versions. And it says that the Prophet ﷺ did his marriage contract with Aisha when she was 6 years old and consummated the marriage when she was 9 years old. And this is, people freak out about this. I can't tell you, I freak out about it. Because I'm a product of my time. And I'm a product of my society. So what I want to talk about today is where these sentiments come from. And I think this is really important for me. It's really important for me. I find it liberating. I find it liberating to understand how diverse humans can be in the world and in history. Spoilers, not all human beings in the world and in human history think like early 21st century Western urban people. Contrary to what you may have heard, we do not possess all the wisdom in the universe. You may have realized this when we start to destroy the environment of our planet in a way that no one before has ever done. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. So this is all the different, This is not. That's me. How do I get this to show up there? Okay, that's great. You don't have to. Don't show pictures of me anymore. It's a waste of people's eye energy, their retinal energy. So this is. It's all going back to Aisha, and she's actually talking about herself. So she's recalling her own experience. You can see these are the different. It appears in other collections, but I just sort of limited it to the main collections: Sahih Muslim, Sahih Bukhari, Sunan al-Darimi, Musannaf Abd al-Razzaq San'ani. He died in 211 or 827 of the Common Era. Sunan of Sa'id bin Mansur, he died at 227, so that's about the 840s of the Common Era from Khorasan. Musnad of Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, Sunan Nasa'i, Ibn Majah. So you can see the different reports that it goes through. And there are different colors because actually the different colors line up with different narrations of the hadith. I'll just give you examples. This is, I think it's Hisham bin Urwa is Aisha's nephew. He's her nephew, and he's a major transmitter of reports about the life of the Prophet Muhammad. Yeah, he married her when she was 6 and consummated the marriage when she was 9, and Abu Bakr married her off to him. In this yellow version here, he married me, she sang when at 9, and I was with him for 9 years. He married her when she was 6, and he died when she was 18. You can see the different... this version is actually really important here, this black one. Where did the black one go? Okay. This one is very important. This is actually the most reliable version. Urwa to his student Az-Zuhri, to Ma'mar bin Rashid, to Abd al-Razzaq San'ani. This is and then this is also in Sahih Muslim. This is not only appearing in one of the earliest collections we have time-wise, it's also a very, very strong chain of transmission by huge scholars. Each one of these figures is a really big scholar. He married her when she was 7, and then the wedding was when she was 9, and then she had her toys with her, and he died when she was 18. He married me when I was 7, consummated was 9. So you can just see, like, these versions are all basically saying the same thing. There's a little bit of difference, maybe a year different there, information about when the Prophet died, what age Aisha was when the Prophet died, but generally they're all the same. Now, just so you know, some people will criticize this hadith using actually the methods of Muslim hadith scholars and say that Hisham bin Urwa, the son of Urwa bin Zubair, when he moved from Medina to Kufa, at that point he was older in his life and he started to get mixed up with the things he narrated, so that a lot of times scholars would not feel confident about things he narrated in Kufa. All these chains are actually in Kufa. So we could actually get rid of all, this should disappear too, but pretend that's not there. We could get rid of all of that material. Let's say we get rid of these chains of transmission because they don't have very many, they're not really corroborated. But here's the thing. This chain here, from Sahih Muslim, from Abd al-Razzaq San'ani, from Ma'mar, Zuhri to Urwa to Aisha, this is a very strong chain of transmission. And it's in Sahih Muslim. And I want you, this is an important point, this is not an important issue. Okay, let's say Aisha said that the Prophet actually said that there's 6 prayers. But you guys are probably Hanafi, so we'll say the winter prayer is like the 6th prayer. You have to do it. Then this would be, people would be like, oh, that's a big issue. Like, we need to have more hadiths. This need to be more narrations of this. This was not a controversial issue. This was like a little piece of biographical information. Nobody cared about it. But it's actually very well transmitted. We'll get into more about this hadith in a second. Now, let's look at marriage age and history. It's very interesting. Roman law, so imperial Roman law. Does anyone here see Gladiator 2? I'm sorry if you didn't. Some good parts, a lot of bad parts. But think Gladiator. Roman law, earliest according to Roman law, earliest age for marriage was 12. That was like kind of legal. Imperial Roman history suggests that as many as 8% of women married at 10 to 11 years old, actually, even before the regular legal marriage age. St. Augustine, you guys may have heard of him, Augustine of Hippo. Anyone here from Algeria?
Yes.
Have you ever been to Hippo? Does it still exist? What's it called? Hippo with a B and not a P. Yeah. So he's one of the most important figures in Christianity. A huge scholar who died in 430 of the Common Era. He was engaged when he was in his 30s. He was engaged to a 10-year-old. He didn't end up getting married because he decided to become a Christian bishop instead. But maybe, yeah, okay. He decided to become a Christian bishop, but she would he was around in his 30s and his fiance was 10, and they were going to wait till she was 12 to actually do the marriage legally, right? Interesting, if you look at the letter of James, which is a text from the early 2nd century, so from the early 2nd century of the Common Era, it's like a non-canonical gospel text, so it's about the life of Jesus in the Christian tradition, but it's not in the Bible. It actually talks about Miriam, Sayyidina Miriam's age, and she was, when she was married to Joseph in this story, she was between 10 and 12 years old. So it's really interesting. If you think about it, anyone here see The Passion of the Christ, Mel Gibson movie?
Yeah.
I need to rewatch that. That was kind of a cool movie. I saw it at like an internet cafe in Egypt in 2004 or something. It was not very high quality computer screen. But if you think about even these other like Charlton Heston Bible movies or something, Mary is always portrayed by kind of like, it's like a sort of a middle-aged actress, sort of some woman like around late 40s or something. And Jesus is like 30 in the movie. I'm not talking about the real film, just talking about the movies, right? So if you think about it, that person, the mom, was very young when she had that child. So we don't think about that, but even in our own movie depictions of these figures, she would have been between 10 and 12. In the Christian tradition, she became pregnant with Jesus after her first menstruation. So she just started to menstruate. Interesting. Italy in the 1300s and 1400s, average age for women to marry was like 16 to 17. Noble women were a lot younger. Noble women are younger because they are supposed to just be baby machines, making more babies for the noble family and like whatever political alliance they're in. This is really interesting for anybody from South Asia originally? Yeah. just two people? Okay, that's great. We got Algerian and 2 South Asian. So Ralph Fitch, one of the first British representatives who goes to South Asia, to Hindustan, and to do trade. He talks about in child marriage. He says there's a marriage he saw between a boy of 9 and a girl of 6. They would consummate the marriage later. But even that was very young. Why, he asked, why would they do this? Parents wanted grandkids during their lifetimes. Now, we're going to look at, inshallah, a little bit about life expectancy, but think about this. If you're going to probably die when you're 30, you better get busy very quickly. And there's no high school, there's no university, there's no med school, there's no, finish your A-levels or whatever people do here, right? You basically are born, and then you start farming or tending goats, and then you go through puberty, and you get married and start having children immediately, because you are probably not going to live very long, and your parents are not going to live very much longer. So, and there's nothing else to do. There's no reason not to. Think about it, right? If you're a human being, and you're capable. I was a teenage guy once. I don't know if this is. I was like a hormonal disaster. I think guys are just machines when they enter puberty and they only think about one thing. Why would you take this kid and like deal with that person. Be like, listen, you want to do this? Get married, do whatever you want, and I don't want to hear any more from you. So it's very kind of unnatural if you think about it to hold someone away from this very basic urge they have. This is a French traveler in India. He died in 1667 in the Deccan. He says the consummation is usually when the boys are 10, the girls are 8 years old. Ragusa. Anybody know where Ragusa is? Hint, it's not in South Asia. Today it's known by a different name. Anyone watch Game of Thrones?
No.
Hey. But you watch the halal version. You watch the airplane version. So that's where they filmed King's Landing. Was in what city? It's Dubrovnik. Today it's the city of Dubrovnik in Croatia. Ragusa was its name before the 1800s. So 1458 law says no Ragusan. I should says no Ragusan man can marry women under 14. But 2 years later they dropped this to 12 for girls and 13 for boys. It's interesting, they actually had to drop the age so people wanted to marry younger. Pre-Ming China. So the Ming Dynasty takes over in China in like the mid-1300s. Somebody look up Ming Dynasty for me. Who's going to be this gentleman looks like he's active on his phone. The Ming Dynasty, 1350, Ming Dynasty. So prior to like the 1100s, 1200s, average minimum age of marriage for boys was about 16 for boys, 14 for girls. What did you find for Ming Dynasty?
It's from 1368 to 1644.
1368. I was 18 years off. 1368. Okay, now we know. This is interesting. So a little bit jumping ahead, but in 1870. 37 U.S. states had age of consent at 10. So 1870, 37 U.S. states. How many states were in the U.S.? 50 now. But, yeah, good one. Yeah, so we'll get into that. So and actually it's really interesting. One of those states was Delaware. Anybody know who's from Delaware? Currently the President of the United States, so he's more nominally speaking, Joe Biden lives in Delaware. Delaware in 1871 dropped it to 7. So imagine that, it was at 10, age of consent, and they said we needed to drop it to 7. Very interesting. I was thinking about why that might be. The Catholic Church, like at the time of, in the 1200s or before the Protestant Reformation, it was just the church, the Western Christian church. The minimum age of marriage was about 7 years old. So I think maybe this was like an attempt to be more Christian or something in 1871 in Delaware. Covering news and by the way, this topic is so interesting to me, and I always find new material on this subject. So like I constantly, people send me material or come across new material. This is the Chattanooga, Tennessee Times, 1937. Covering news in Tennessee, Alabama, and Georgia, the greatest places for news, and trout. Mountain Girl 9 years old, weds youth 22. This is clearly unusual because it's making the newspaper, but is this like, are they being arrested? Is this being condemned? So it's like, oh, this is really interesting. Okay. So this is the interesting. What's this she's carrying here?
No.
I just realized this. I just saw this right now. Because there's that hadith that talks about how Aisha RA had her some dolls. So it's interesting that they actually have this picture with her toys. Alabama warring leaders depose gag. Well, just 8 murder cases faced. Interesting stuff happening in Tennessee. This is Le Comte de Gobineau, French nobleman and intellectual, and let's face it, racist. I think it's fair to say this guy was pretty racist. He has a book called On the Superiority of Whites to Other Races. So I think that makes you racist. I'd say that's fair enough. This is very interesting. He's the one who develops like the idea of there's like different kinds of white people. There's Alpine white people, Mediterranean white people, and Nordic white people, things like that. There's a big kind of race thinker about human species and classification and race in the 19th century. Very influential. This is from one of his books. According to a Protestant missionary in East Africa, the Wanikas, which is a ethnic group which is still known in East Africa, marry at 12 boys and girls alike. In Paraguay, the Jesuits introduced a custom which still holds among their disciples of marrying the boys at 13 and the girls at 10. Widows of 11 and 12 are to be seen in the country. In South Brazil, the women marry at 10 or 11. Menstruation both appears and ceases at a very early age. Note that. Menstruation, he's saying they menstruate at an early age. Such quotations might be infinitely extended. I will cite only one more, etc., etc. Again, there's no disapproval issue. We're just noting this as an interesting fact about human society. Britain, since we're here, we might as well talk about the green and pleasant land. English common law was either the first or among the first to have statutory rape laws. What does that mean? It means that if there's consummation with this person under a certain age, it's automatically illegal. Statute of Westminster in 1275, consummation with an underage girl, meaning either 12 or 14, it's unclear which from the wording of the law, regardless of consent, was criminalized. 1576, the age was reduced to 10. I have a question. So this is different from what we've seen so far, correct? Before it's like noting, it's not really controversial, it's noting stuff around these ages happening. This is different though. This is saying, no, actually, if you do this, it's illegal. I want you to ask yourself why that is. We'll get back to it in a second. You may not know the answer, or you may know the answer, or you may guess. We'll see. If you read the Canterbury Tales, one of the earliest famous work of Middle English, what is it? Middle English, right?
Chaucer.
Yeah, is it Middle? It's Middle English. It's not Old English.
Anglo-Saxon.
Somebody look up what the language of Chaucer is called. Is it called Middle English, or I don't want to make a mistake.
Early English. No, it's middle.
Because Old English would be like Beowulf.
No, that's Nordic. That's not actually English.
It is English.
It's part of the Nordic tradition.
But it's. Are you a scholar? I mean, I'm not challenging you. I'm saying, are you happen to be a professor of this topic? And otherwise, I'm going to stop. In that case, I'll stop arguing.
I have a BA in history.
Okay, mashallah. Somebody look this up.
Middle English.
Middle English?
Yeah.
Okay, I feel pretty good about myself now. So this is also, by the way, around the time of Chaucer, the late 1300s, is the first time that English gets used in the Parliament in Westminster. They have the Parliament's proceedings are held in English. What were they held in before? What language? Yeah, take that, folks. If you read the Canterbury Tales, there's a character called the Wife of Bath, and she said she was married at 12 years of age. This is a normal thing. But in Europe, marriage age tended to be later, in general, in the mid-20s. This is interesting. If you look at Western Europe, especially Northwestern Europe, France, kind of Netherlands, England, Britain, marriage age tends to be a little bit older than places like Italy and Mediterranean. Interestingly, James Bruce is a Scottish explorer. This is a very interesting book, by the way. He went looking for the source of the Nile River, but he traveled through the Hejaz and then like into Sudan and stuff. Really interesting. He wrote it, and he says in Arabia, he talks about the customs in the Hejaz area, and he says at 11 a girl is an object of love and beauty and having kids. He says for them it's 11. In England it's like 14. Again, he's not ashamed of that. This is a totally normal. He's like, oh yeah, in England at 14, like that's when we start to get married and expect girls to have children. So there it's a little bit earlier, around 11. Okay, now something happens in the late 19th century. You start to see a big change. In 1860, the age of consent in Britain is 10 years old. But in 1861, just an example, census in England shows that over 350 women were married under 15 in just 2 counties that year. So just 2 counties in 1861, over 350 women are married under the age of 15. But then you get into the late 19th century, and things start to change. There's a big kind of scandal, a scandal story in the Pall Mall Gazette. That's actually, it talks about marriage in Bengal, so Britain was today kind of West Bengal and Bangladesh, the Bengal area of British India, and how like women are getting married really young there, and then how they're also coming to Britain and doing this, and that like young white women are being. Holy moly! I just realized this is a familiar story, right? This idea that Muslims are bringing like their weird, scary practices here and are like capturing young girls. This is a very old boogeyman story that will constantly be brought up in the media about Muslims. And this actually leads to reforms in the law, change in law to raise the age of consent from 13 up to 16 in the 1890s. So in the 1880s, 1890s, you start seeing like actually change in the law and also social perceptions. It's really interesting. And I had all these people's pictures here, but I took them out because I thought I had to send this on the internet and it was not too big a file. Okay. Snoop Grogne is a Dutch Orientalist. He's a Dutch scholar of Islam who spends much of his life in Java, the big island main island of Indonesia in terms of population, right? When he was there, he married a 13-year-old Indonesian girl. Interesting. Oh, that's him right there, actually. I have his picture. Snoop Grogne. Why is there this change? Why is there starting to be like a change in sentiment? When I read this blew my mind when I read this the first time. It really shocked me. The average age for the onset of menstruation in northwestern Europe in the late 1700s was 18 years old. I want to repeat that. The average age for women to start menstruating in Northwest Europe in the late 1700s was 18. Do you know what it is today in like the United States? It's like 11 or 12 years old. Yeah. It's dropped even in the last 20 years by a year or two. And you know what? Nobody actually knows why. It's interesting. No one knows why. It's maybe hormone in foods, maybe no one knows why. There is tremendous diversity in human history and geography about when people go through puberty. Huge diversity. Now, would that have surprised people like Gobino or Fitch or people like that? No. Because it was actually pretty normal for humans believed that they were influenced by their environment. You go back to like the time of Aristotle or Herodotus in the 5th century BCE, and they'll talk about like why Africans look a certain way and Indians look a certain way, and Romans look a certain way and Greek people look a certain way. They say, oh, it's because of their environment, because of the heat or because of the sun. Whether that's accurate or not is not the point. But the point is the idea that people's bodies work differently in different areas was completely. Was a presumed, was an assumption. I think it's a feature of the modern West that we think that everybody in history is like us. Do you guys agree with me? Do you agree with me? I mean, we tend to think that everybody in the world either is like us or they should be like us. So, I mean, think about this, right? Like, why is hijab bad? Why are women are being oppressed in Iran because of hijab? Why? Because women want to take off hijab because that's what Western people want to do, right? Sometimes everybody in the world wants to live like us, wants to live like modern Western people. And if they don't want to, it's just because they don't understand what's good for them yet. They just need to be talked to and understand. Then they'll understand what's really good for them. This is really, not only do we assume that everyone in the world today wants to be like us, really, we think that everybody in the past wanted to be like us. And their bodies were like our bodies. This is not true. Look at this.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't understand. Maybe it's just me. This is mind-blowing to me. What that means is if you consummated marriage to a, let's say, what do you think, what age did, like, let's say, non-Muslim British people start to, like, become active in this area of their life? What age?
16.
So let's say 13, 16, let's say 15.
Yeah.
15 okay?
Yeah.
I would say in the US probably 15, 16, that's my guess. Obviously everyone's different, but like as an average, that would be the equivalent in, let's say Britain in 1500, that would be the equivalent today of doing that with like a 10-year-old. So a 15-year-old in Britain in 1500 was like an 8, 9, or 10-year-old today. That's so interesting. Montesquieu, the famous French philosopher and historian, Le Baron Charles de Secondat de Montesquieu, wrote the book on the fall of the Roman Empire, wrote The History of the Spirit of the Laws, terrific book, 2 volumes, you can read it, it's very interesting. It's all about how human societies and morals change based on time and environment. He talks about women become nubile in hot climates at 9 or 10 years old, so their childhood and marriage come at almost the same time. He then adds a note that Muhammad married Khadija, he means Aisha, at 5 years old and slept with her at 8. And is this like a negative statement? No, this is just like he's just observing this. Absolutely no evaluation involved. What changes? Why did things start changing in the 1800s? Industrialism. I mean, this has to be the reason. Do you know when people in this country where the Industrial Revolution first occurred, when did they start to realize, like, hey, things are really different. Life is starting to change a lot because of industrialization. Do you know when this is? Going back and looking at people's diaries and writings and things like that. It was like this mid to late 1700s. People really started to realize like life was changing. There's a significant change in your life. For most of human history, your life was just the same as your parents' life. There was no change between your life and your parents' life. If you go back to like human history, between 1700 and like 1000 BC or 2000 BC, not really much changing. Most people are farmers. Very few people live in cities. Cities are really dangerous, disease-ridden places. Every once in a while, someone figures out something like gunpowder. That was a big deal. Coffee, that's kind of cool, right? But nothing changes really. Think about this. How old are you, for example? How old are you? Yeah.
I'm 18.
Okay, so when did you get do you have like a smartphone or anything?
Yeah.
When did you get that?
First one I was around like 13.
Okay, and you have the internet your whole life. So, I used to have to like go to books, find information. You like want to go visit somewhere, you have to go to the map and like write down the directions and everything like that. Just in my lifetime, the amount of change that's happened is insane. Like if you told me when I was 10 years old that there was going to be like that I would have this phone and what it could do, I mean, I'd be like, yeah, like maybe in Star Trek or something. This is not real. It can't really happen. This is just because of the internet. Go back and think about like air travel, antibiotic. The fact that if you get a cut on your finger, you're not going to die. The fact that if you go when you're a woman and you're having a child, you're almost certainly not going to die. These are changes in the 20th century. Go back and just think about how much has changed, how much that actually affects the human body. Huge impact. Think about this public schooling. The idea that you would go to school. This is really important, by the way. I don't have this fact here for no reason. Why is this important? Mandatory school. What do people do before that? You're on the farm. What do? You're a kid. You work on the farm, right? Almost everybody's working in agriculture. There's no reason to be educated. I mean, there's no points. You're not gonna, why? Your job is to farm. Question, you go out on the farm. There's like a kid who can lift up, he's strong, he can lift up a bunch of hay, and there's a kid who's not strong yet, not big yet, and they can't lift up a bunch of hay. Does it matter like that this kid's 8 or this kid's 9 or this kid's 10? No, years are meaningless. It doesn't matter, right? What matters is your physical and your mental maturity. That's what's important. But when you get things like mandatory schooling, in the UK, what age do you have to go to school now? I'm curious.
Up to 16.
No, what age do you start?
5.
So if let's say you don't put your kid in school, what's going to happen?
Prosecution.
Yeah, so you will be forced to put your child in school. And you can say, but my kid is just still like a baby. You think these other kids are so much bigger than him. He can't really talk that well. Is he going to get bullied? But they can say, oh, it's okay. Don't worry about it. No, this kid goes into school. With the rest of the 5-year-olds, age becomes your number of calendar years you've been alive becomes how you're categorized by the state. The government comes in and says, we are now going to organize society by age. It doesn't matter if you're physically, so many kids, like one of my kids' school, how old is he? He's 12. He's like kind of small. He's like a smaller kid, but there's kids in this, always like, they had this thing where they ran around for Thanksgiving, like a track event. I mean, there were some kids, little tiny kids who looked like they were like 25 years old, in one grade. If you think about it, this is a very bizarre way to organize society. I'm just saying, I'm not saying I could do any better, but it's very weird because that's not how, when you see somebody, you don't judge them like, oh, you're 25 or you're 18. No, we look at how people look, how they're talking, how they're acting. And if when we're attracted to people, we're not attracted to them because like, oh, what's your age? We see a person, a member of our species in front of us, and we're naturally inclined towards certain people for certain reasons. This is a big change. People start to think about age, not about your physical or mental maturity. Medical care and life expectancy. This is a huge change. I wonder where this. Okay, here we go. This is so interesting, guys. This is fascinating. I gotta say, this is the UK. Life expectancy in the UK. 1765, 1875. It's about the same, around 40. When did things start to change? 1880s. What happens in 1880s? Well, 1882, refrigeration is invented. I mean, that's one thing. I'm just giving refrigeration. Things like, germ theory. The idea that like infection happens through transmission of germs, and you have to have sterilization of materials and keeping your hands clean and cleaning instruments with like antiseptic materials. This idea starts. A bit of a drop here. Anybody know why this might be? the WW1 and the flu, the 1918, 1919 Spanish flu pandemic. That's my guess.
Yeah.
Discovery of penicillin. What year was penicillin discovered? 1920 something? Who's going to tell me? Somebody look this up. 1926?
I think, yes.
Thank you. Big increase. You're no longer going to die of an ear infection. Do you know how many times my kids had ear infections? This happened here in the UK. They were like getting ear infections every 2 weeks. Antibiotic. I'm not saying that's a good idea or a bad idea, but the point is, you're not going to die because you have an infection. And look, since then until now, look at this, 2015. It's double the 1875 life expectancy. So you're talking about 150 years, double life expectancy. Suddenly, you don't have, you can take time, I'm going to study until I'm 25 years old. I'm going to go to med school. I'm going to go to law school. I need to meet the right person. I'm not ready yet. I need to travel, et cetera, et cetera. You can expect to live into your 70s or 80s. I'm not saying you should, assume this, but people have this expectation. People don't mature as quickly. You're like a 40-year-old guy playing video games. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but there is. But not that there's anything wrong with that, right? This is the US. It's interesting. Look how much earlier we have statistics in Britain, by the way. Isn't that interesting? Okay, the US, similar jump in this. I'm just guessing about things like refrigeration. That's my theory, but we could do probably someone's done more research on this. Again, kind of probably Spanish flu is my guess here. Really around the same time. And then up here, you're essentially double life expectancy in 1880. Okay, I have a question. If there is a news story about child marriage, where is that news story going to take place? I know 2 places.
Utah.
What?
Utah, US.
Today? Like in the news today?
I think that's what I'd expect it from the US, Utah.
I'm a little offended. But considering that I'm not from Utah, we'll go with it. That wasn't. I'm glad. Let's put America in the hot seat. Fine. But any other places? I always see this come up. There's one country that always comes up.
India.
Afghanistan. And there's another country. It doesn't come up a lot. Now it's been in the news, but it always comes up only in the context of child marriage for some reason.
Malaysia.
India, definitely. Well, India, Afghanistan, they're kind of linked.
Yemen also.
Yes, Yemen. So this is India.
Wow.
I mean, look at the, by the way, life expectancy is in mid-20s until 1930. Where does it's like 1935 is really where things start to change. So I often hear like my Pakistani friends will talk about how their grandmother got married when she was like 10 years old. Yeah, she did get married when she was 10 years old. You know why? Because she was probably going to die when she was 30 years old. So why wait around? She wasn't going to go to med school and wait till she met the right person. When she was 28. So in some, it's kind of ridiculous to. It's unfair to blame people for not having changed culturally when their experience with the fundamentals of life and death have been so different from a place like the UK or the US. You think India is bad. This is Yemen. Low mid-20s. This is like 24 until 1952, 53. That's a good 20 years later than India before you start having a big increase, and even younger. This is fascinating. By the way, this is the average. So when you hear these stories about like, yeah, how many people getting married young, it's not like, a diplomat in Sana'a or like, PhD candidate in like computer science in Sana'a. It's like some guy living up in the mountains or something like that. This is the average. You think about a place like Afghanistan. Afghanistan has been obliterated by war. Not, by the way, it's not like Afghans wanted that, right? Their country was invaded and then invaded again and bombed into smithereens by outside powers. Their country was destroyed. And I mean, I couldn't actually find data about it. I would like to know what the life expectancy of an Afghan male is in like between 1980 and 2023. I would really like to know what the life expectancy is. I'm gonna guess it's pretty low. So the idea that we kind of, I find it's deeply unfair to look at if the U.S. had gone through what Afghanistan has gone through, we would be straight up Mad Max situation. We would be like, have yellow, orange mohawks, walking around with shotguns, in like weird biker gangs. It would be insane, okay? And then the idea someone comes to be like, what's wrong with you guys? What's wrong with your religion? Why are you like this? What's wrong with you guys? Why don't you get with the program? These countries were destroyed. This country was destroyed, And of course they're not gonna have like first world sensibilities and life expectancies and things like that. Okay. How much time do I have? Not very much time. That's good. So this is really interesting. This is from Sahih al-Bukhari. So he's talking about the age at which women attain puberty. And he says, قال الحسن بن صالح أدركت جارة لنا جد. I saw a girl. This scholar is in the late 700s, early 800s. Hassan bin Saleh. He says, I came across where I was living a girl who was a grandmother. She was 21 years old. So this is like, he's right. This is really interesting. This is surprising. This is from Al-Bayhaqi. This is narrating about Imam al-Shafi'i. Imam al-Shafi'i, when he was a judge in Yemen. One of his first jobs, he was a judge for the Abbasid dynasty in Sana'a, in Yemen. Imam al-Shafi'i said, رأيت بصنعاء جدة بنت 21 سنة. Same thing. I met a girl who was a grandmother, and she's 21. She's a 21-year-old grandmother. حاضت ابنة 9. She started to menstruate when she was 9. Then she had a child. وحاضت البنت ابنة 9. That daughter also menstruated when she was 9. وولدت ابنة and she was when she had a child when she was 10. So she was a 21-year-old grandmother. Now, why is Imam Shafi'i? This was like crazy. This was a crazy thing he saw. But he's not like disapproving. This is just it's an interesting case he came across. This is when we look at the historian, famous Muslim historian Tabari, who died in 923 of the Common Era, 310 Hijri. He talks about Aisha's marriage to the Prophet. He says they did the contract and she was too young. So they waited. He doesn't say why, but the assumption is they wait till she's mature enough to consummate the marriage. And this is also very interesting. In Tabari's history, Mut'ab bin Adi, someone had actually already asked for Aisha's hand in marriage before the Prophet. And Abu Bakr, her father, had said no. In Aleppo in the mid-1700s, families marry their children off at a young age. They consummate when the girl had come of age. Question. In Sharia, in Islamic law, do you have to marry your daughter off at the age of 9? No. What age should people get married at? They should get married at the age that people get married at in that society. That's the usual fiqh ruling, right? Which is you get married at the age that people get married at in your society. So what age should Muslims get married in Britain?
18.
I mean, that's a kind of a trick question. That's a very controversial question, right? Let's talk about America. I mean, not because it's written, but just in general. This is a really good question because actually, if you were to go by marriage in America, if you're like a educated urban American, you probably the average late 20s, early 30s. If you're kind of more rural American, you're not very well educated, you're less well educated, you're probably going to marry earlier, right? So it depends a lot on class, on where you live. But Americans are not abstinent until they get married, right? So here's the question. This is a question that like Muslims debate in America. I think it's a very interesting question. Like, should you say to your kids, you need to wait until you get married when you're 28 after med school or whatever? It's kind of ridiculous. Or do you say, listen, you're going to get married when you're really young. We're going to have like a nikah. And if it doesn't work out, no big deal. And, like we'll support you. And so do you like kind of go by what the society is saying about marriage, or do you go by what the society says about when people get active in that? I'm not saying what the correct thing is, because I don't really know that, but I'm not sure. It's a very interesting discussion. So the irony is people will be like, oh, how can, Muslims believe this stuff? It's so backward. It's like, no, Muslims aren't saying you should go and do this. Muslims, things like marriage and this kind of relationship are determined by what's customary in your society. As one of the 5 major qawaid fiqhiyya kubra is al-'ada muhakkama. Custom is dispositive. Custom is definitive in areas that are not specifically determined by the Sharia, like with a number or age. Edward William Lane, Englishman who lived in Egypt for many years, and wrote very famous manners and customs of the Egyptian people, and also a great dictionary in Arabic. Women married as young as 10, few remain single by 16, but they tend to arrive at puberty much earlier than natives of colder climates. Washington Irving, a famous American writer who wrote the Legend of Sleepy Hollow. You guys know like the Headless Horseman, the Johnny Depp movie. You guys know this story? He wrote this story, the original story. He also wrote a biography of the Prophet Muhammad, which is really interesting. I think he also wrote a book called Tales of the Alhambra.
Yes.
Have you ever read this? You're from Spain, right?
Yes.
Is it a good book? Someone gave it to me. I haven't read it yet.
It's okay, but he was one of the main reasons why Alhambra was taken care.
Yeah. Well, good. That's good.
It used to be a place for homeless people. Alhambra.
That's also good. But I mean, like a place they go to get taken care of, or they just go and live there and
like anyone would enter there.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Okay. So he's writing about the Prophet Muhammad, and he says he married Aisha and she was this age. It's just females still boom and right in those Eastern times. There's no controversy about it. When did condemnations start? This is very interesting. On the right, there's a picture of David Margolioff in 1905. The earliest time I've seen this controversy mentioned actually is in the letters of Mirza Ghulam Ahmad. You may know who that is, right? So he actually has this. Here's the Urdu. I actually haven't been able to find the date. So I think it's 1890s. He's in a debate. He's writing a kind of angry letter to this Christian priest, this English priest, who's sort of attacking Aisha's age as like a way of criticizing Islam. It's really interesting. Mirza Muhammad, his main activity prior to claiming to be a prophet was actually debates with Christians. That's very interesting. So he's the first person I've seen engage in this discussion. 1905, David Margoliev, who's an Oxford professor and historian, writes about early Islamic history. He talks about Aisha as, he says it's an ill-sorted union, for as such we must characterize the marriage of a man of 50 to a child of 9. This is a really interesting statement for a number of reasons. Do you think it was an ill-sorted union? I mean, just objectively speaking. Forget about like what's right or what's wrong. So I think Aisha might be the most influential woman in history.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Like I think if she's not the probably like top 5, top 2 or 3 most influential, and not because she was like influential as a political leader, as a religious leader, as a jurist, as a theologian, as a historian. Think about like all the issues of theology. Tabari. Think about all the issues of law.
Yeah.
Think about all the issues of history. Think about all the issues of politics that she helped define. This is, I mean, we can approve or disapprove, but to say this is an ill-assorted union, I mean, if I had a daughter and someone was like, listen, she's going to marry this guy at this age and she's going to be one of the most influential women in human history, I'd be like, let's do it. I don't have any daughters, so I mean, I would be like, this is not a bad idea. So this idea of saying that this is a very interesting perspective on the past. Recently someone sent this to me, and just goes to show this is a very early text. This is published in 1574. Wow. It's extremely early. It's written by a guy named Johann Andreas Moros. I cannot figure out who this guy is. There's very little information. He's Spanish, by the way. Do you know, have you ever heard of him?
Yeah, I've heard of him. I haven't.
Okay. It was originally written in Spanish. This is a French translation, a very early French translation. He used to be, allegedly, a faqih. Allegedly, he was a Muslim. I don't think this is true because Muslims were forced to convert in 1525 or leave. Maybe he was forced to convert or he decided to become Christian. But anyway, allegedly, he used to be a Muslim and became Christian. He wrote this book called The Confusion of the Sect of Muhammad. He says, this is extremely old French. Sir, I'm going to read in like what I assume is the way French was read back then, because they would have pronounced the last letters. Sur quoi je te veux demander, what I want to ask you, and I want that que tu me respondes au more. I want to ask you, and I want you to respond to me more like Muslim. Quoi faire Muhammad de consommer mariage avec, look how anyone here studies French, look how he spells avec une petite fille âgée de 8 ans. So how do you respond to the fact that Muhammad married a girl who was 8 years old? Ce qui est presque un homicide, une péché contre nature. He says this is like almost murder, and it's a sin against nature. So I'm totally honest about this stuff. This is really interesting to me because this doesn't fit with the pattern we've seen. And I'm just bringing it up because I think it's really interesting. But this is the last point I'll make, right? Which is, during the life of the Prophet, his enemies looked for anything they could find to discredit him.
Correct.
They even looked at his personal life to try and discredit him. Like the marriage of Zayd and Zaynab. Zayd is the only person mentioned in the Quran besides the Prophet, the only person in his time. By the way, there's a really good article on Yaqeen Institute about the Zayd and Zaynab, if you're interested in that issue. It's very interesting. I recommend it on YaqeenInstitute.org. They attacked the Prophet's personal life to try. Did they mention his marriage to Aisha?
No.
Do they say, like, you married a young girl? No. No one. If you look, for example, John of Damascus, he died around 749. He has a book about these different heresies and religious heresies. He attacks Islam. He says, he worked, by the way, as a scribe for the Umayyad caliphs. He worked in the Umayyad caliphate, then he became a monk. He says, these Muslims, they worship Khobar, Allahu Khobar. They worship these weird camel things they talk about. Does he mention Aisha's marriage? Early Christians in the Middle East and in Europe, do they mention Aisha? They do. They start to, but what do they say? They talk about her age? They say that he had a dream about her, he became obsessed with her. Mashallah, he became obsessed with her. They don't talk about the age. For essentially 1,350 years, with the exception of this example, this one example is the only thing I've ever found. With the exception of this example, no one brings this up until the 1890s. People who were obsessed with trying to undermine the legitimacy of the Prophet Muhammad, and who knew that one way to do that was to go after his personal life, and who knew he even had tried to do this regarding Aisha. They did not mention her age. What does that tell you? And when did they start to talk about it? In the 1890s, at precisely that time when we noticed that change in understanding around like marriage age and sexuality in Western Europe. That's all I have to say. Thank you very much. Sorry for going so long.
Well, very fascinating. We have one hadith about Aisha saying, that she got married at the age of 9, and this was researched for only one hadith. That's truly amazing.
And this is just about not even on the hadith. This is just about the history around it.
The history around it. Yeah. Okay, so we'll open the door for questions now. We actually went over 10 minutes, but it's understandable. But if anybody have any questions, inshallah, today, you can raise your hand and you could basically just speak a bit loud. I'll take your question, brother. Go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum. So the first question I had was, you also showed the graphs related to age, right? So you showed India had a life expectancy around 20 to 30. UK was under 40, right? One thing that kind of confused me a bit was that during the Prophet Sallallahu time, he obviously passed away at the age of around 60, and Abu Talib around 80, something around that. So the age of life expectancy seemed to be a lot higher. One was there a reason for that, and two, could that raise question as to why they were marrying people that was so young if they were to live longer?
Yeah. Okay, so this is a really good question, and in some ways, like those graphs are kind of deceptive because one of the reasons. This is very important. Those were life expectancy for a healthy baby, so a live birth of a healthy child. A lot of children die in childbirth, right? This is like a child is born, a healthy baby, what its life expectancy is going to be. But most deaths occur, this is, I think, pretty common in human history, among children. So, for example, if you go to the biggest city in Europe in the 1500s was, well, except for Constantinople, was Naples. There's about 150,000 people. About half of children die before they reach 15. Right? So one of the reasons you have a low life expectancy, it's not like everybody's dying at 30. It's that a lot of people are dying between 0 and 15. If you made it past your teens, you actually had a pretty good chance of living like into your, living into your 50s, 60s, or 70s, or something like that, right? So it's not that like it was insane that somebody lived till they were 60. In fact, you have people who live till they're 70, 80, 90, 100 years old. So it was like what the kind of average was. So, but definitely, because if you were pubescent, able to reproduce, you do not have any expectation of how long you would be. You could die the next year. Like, I mean, we could all die. Like, it was very likely. So that's why people got. I think that's one of the reasons people got married. That definitely, without a doubt.
Okay, go ahead. Oh.
I was going to ask, would you think it's not an attack on the moral high ground per se, but rather autonomy and agency? See, and choice and living life, because I don't think it's a desired last kind of battleground right now. It's more of a autonomy, agency, and especially with the rise of the 80s to the 1920s, the suffragettes and women movements.
Yeah.
So do you think it's a reaction based on that rather than anything else?
So I think I think that's an important point, right? I mean, it's not when they object to this, it's not. I mean, there is like some visceral. People have like a visceral reaction, but it's also, I think you're correct, that the kind of moral objection is about the ability of mental maturity and consent and things like that. So one, that also changes over time. So if you were, so I mean, you go back and look at like people like Thomas Jefferson and stuff. Like these guys were like, writing books in their teens. And these people were functionally adults in their mid-teens. Nowadays, you're functionally on PS5 in your 30s, right? So I mean, the point is that there's a lot. I think the notion of like mental maturity, emotional maturity, this also changes over time, and it also requires something very complicated, which is to actually critique this idea of consent. Like, what does it mean? Consent, and this is not my scholarship, other scholars, people like Judith Butler have talked about this, which is that the idea of obsession with consent as the only thing that makes things moral is based on the idea that she talks about is like the fetishization of the fantasy of the liberal subject. That we're all like these brains that just sort of float around totally unattached, like our families don't mean anything. We just these minds that go around and make choices. And like, how could you do something because your family wants you to? That's wrong to impose on other people. But actually, most human beings in world history and most people today definitely do things because their parents want them to. Right? I mean, the idea that your choice for marriage is based on like who you love and what you want. This is like most people in human history. It doesn't mean that. We know we read in the Quran the purpose of marriage, to find sukoon, to find peace with one another. We know that the idea of rahmah and things like this. Well, I'm not trying to say we have some cynical view of marriage, but the idea that like what your family wants is not important, and that you kind of individually make a choice is a very specific view on human life, which is very limited in terms of who's held this in world history. So again, if that's what people want to do in the modern urban world, I'm not going to, maybe that's the right thing to do today. But to go back in time and kind of judge other people for not thinking like that, I think is completely inappropriate. But that's a very good point.
Okay, anybody else? Go ahead, Muhammad Idris.
What's your personal response to those who try to push the age upwards?
Aisha's age?
Yeah, from the Muslim.
Yeah, so like my take on that is, listen, this is a tiny detail. Like, this is not ma'lum min ad-din bid-darura. This is not like something you have to believe or you're not Muslim. I mean, this is a detail that has almost no even legal implication. It's a historical detail. If you think I don't believe this is not like, I mean, someone could say, well, you should because the hadith is reliable. But I mean, this is not like...
Academically, I mean.
Oh, academically? You mean from Muslims' perspective or non-Muslims?
From Muslims who try to say that she actually got married after 18, some say 18. Academically, what's your response?
You want me to respond?
No, you go ahead.
No, I mean, you seem like...
I'll say after you.
I mean, okay, so basically, like, what I would say is, okay, I mean, listen, if this were weak hadith, that would be great. Like, I love it when something that's controversial is not really well tested. That's great. It saves all of us a lot of work. But this is a pretty strong hadith. And it's also, there's no controversy. There's nothing, it's not like, Aisha said the Prophet only played with his hands at his sides. Okay, now this is a controversial issue. So we're going to talk about but there's no debate about this. It's not like, this is some madhab difference between the Hanafis and the Shafis or something. This is not a controversial issue. And this is her talking about herself. It's not like me saying, I remember when this happened and this other person was that age. She said, I was this age. You can say, well, if she didn't know exactly what age. Okay, maybe she was 10, maybe she was 11, maybe she was 12, maybe she was 13. But this is like, people saying she's 18, 19 years old. I find that very unconvincing. And the evidence they're using is all pieces of data that are less well attested than the hadith itself. Now, but if this happened the other day, and this happens a lot to me. People will be like, I'm sorry, I just can't accept on this issue or other issues. And I say, like someone wrote a book called Islam and Slavery, rebutting my book, Slavery and Islam. And he was I just saw someone send me that, I just watched it the other day. This guy is so angry. He's like, I'm outraged by Jonathan Brown. I can't believe it. This is not my Islam, blah, blah, blah. This is And you know what? Someone sent me this. They're like, what do you have to say about this? I said, I don't know. I'm not going to argue with this person. If you feel this strongly about this topic, I'm not going to debate this with you. Especially on the age of Aisha. If you feel this is like, you think the argument is stronger that she's 18, almost out. This is not like a big debate. I think the bigger problem is us not being able to put our own morals in perspective. That's a problem because that will appear over and over again. It will just, if it's not this issue, it's another issue.
Thank you. Sorry, you had a question as well. Go ahead.
Well, the marriage of Aisha to Muhammad, is both talking about procreation, are we? Because I know that, I feel that younger people are often married off for the sake of property, money, and other influences, and not necessarily for the procreation. Am I wrong in that?
As far as I know in world history, and this is obviously a big generalization, but as far as I know from the data we have, there was very much interest in procreation. Like you got married so that let's say you're a rich family and you want an alliance with another rich family. That alliance doesn't mean anything unless you're producing people that are a combination of those two families, right? It's not just a marriage, like so you can hang out with each other on holidays. Like you have to have people that are produced by that union that then are accommodations of those two families.
As far as I know, the marriage between Prophet Islam and Aisha RA, it was not like as usual marriage. It was because he never saw before Aisha RA before marriage, and it was not like normal proposal or like that. It was, I think he dreamed like that. What I know, so it is not like controversial issue. Maybe it is like a revelation of Almighty Allah, like that. It is for me. It is like a miracle matter.
I think that's there are reports about this, and in fact, I'm not saying this is true, but that's actually what people like the medieval critics who want to try and say she was obsessed with her. They go and think, I have this dream. So they take that report and they build on that. They don't talk about her age, but I think this is definitely there's reports about that the god showed the Prophet
Yeah.
on a vision. I mean, this is not this is not like doesn't interface with the age issue.
Sorry, yes, go ahead.
This puts into doubt all the other stuff, the criticisms from the West about Islam, because if they can miss this huge context regarding this one issue, then how many other things are they using or manipulating to fit their bias? I mean, this is just one.
So I mean, that's a really interesting point, observation. Like, what I think is fascinating is that for 1,300 years, you have Western scholars like Montesquieu or Washington Irving, all these people. They're very critical of Islam. They might say this is a false religion. But they don't criticize that issue because they understand that there's this diversity. The human beings are not always the same. They should respond to their environment. I'm not saying that's true or not. I'm just saying that's actually what it was normal for them to think about people being really different in different times and places. I think the problem with modern Western scholars is, and it's surprising how there's this idea called presentism, which is a kind of concept. The idea that like we constantly judging the past by the standards of the present, and people just obsessively do this. And even when you can tell them like clearly, like you can't, you can intellectually talk to them about this, and they would be like, "Oh yeah, you're right," and then they'll go back exactly to the same thing, which is they'll start judging people in the past by standards of the present. It's almost like it's not something that is reasoned. It's just this. It's almost like an article of faith that we are like the pinnacle of our species. And of course, the irony is that if you believe that we now understand morality better than everyone else, and you say, yeah, this changes, what you're saying is in 10 years or 20 years, people are going to look back on us, and we're going to look back on ourselves with contempt. So you should actually be extremely humble. You should be totally humble because you're like, I know what I'm saying is going to be wrong in 10 years, but that's not that. They're still just all the more certain, even with this recognition.
Yeah, just about the Prophet marriage to Bibi Khadija. He told that she was 40 years old, and then after that she has 6 kids. I mean, where do we get these numbers from?
I think so. It's interesting. I saw some argument the other day that she was like younger, but I didn't really look into it.
There's no Hadith or anything.
I think this is in Seerah reports, very early Seerah reports. I mean,
Ibn Hisham.
people are really different bodies. Like some women have children into their 40s.
She got made it.
Yeah, I mean, this is, again, what's interesting is nobody said, hey, how's this? Like, people would say this. I mean, it's interesting. Like, Muslims, it's not like Muslims are just blind followers of this material. They ask questions. They say, like, how did this, like, they'll talk about when things come up that don't make sense, like chronologically or kind of naturally speaking, they'll say, like, I don't really understand this report. But I've never seen that around Khadija's age. Maybe it exists, but I have not come across it.
Okay.
I didn't really understand the bit where, you were really shocked by this text you put. You said that women began to menstruate at the age of 18, but you really
You don't understand why I was shocked?
No, yeah.
Look,
I wasn't.
Are you shocked?
No, I wasn't listening properly.
Have you gone to you guys have health class in school?
No. I didn't. The reason why I didn't understand.
Yeah.
Is it? Right, I don't know how to say this in a PG. Let me.
Just go for it. I don't care, man. You're not gonna offend me.
So you're telling me that the people were getting married to these sisters at the age of 10, 11, and then they started menstruating at 18. Is that why you were shocked?
No, they're not getting married. Remember, I told you England has these
really weird early statutory rape laws. I said this kind of stands out in history. It's probably because they're actually menstruating much later.
But they get married earlier.
No, they're not. I mean, the wife of Bath is 12. She's probably on the young side, right? But like, because that's like, she's like his character, who's this very rich person, like a noble person. So this idea, maybe she's like got married really young. But what's shocking is that in Britain, let's say in the year 1500, a 16-year-old girl would not be menstruating yet, which is just a completely different universe. Just think about like going around and seeing. That means that the average in high school, like people go to high school like 14 to 18 here, maybe.
Age of 11.
11. So in America, like high school is like 14, around that age, 14 to 18. The average would be that only girls in their senior year would be menstruating. That would be the average. That's very different from.
All right, folks, we're not going to take any more questions. The food is here, and I've been told, like, can we just end this because the food's going to get cold?
Yeah, no, I don't want to. My wife, there's nothing worse than food. It's like murder is better than that.
However, since we have one question from the sisters, I'm just going to ask the professor. Some of the sisters are also listening to you, and they're asking that, what do you really think are the factors that delayed maturity in children over the years?
What did what?
What do you think are the factors that delayed maturity?
Like physical maturity or mental maturity?
No, physical maturity.
I've tried to research about this as much as I can, and I don't think anyone like. In the U.S., there has been a drop in average age of menstruation for girls over the past 2 decades, and nobody knows why.
It's the same here.
Yeah, so there's different theories. There are like hormones in food, blah blah blah. Like, there's no answer. It's like people that don't know what causes autism, what causes all these peanut allergies. Everyone's got peanut allergies, right? I'm not being critical of scientists or something. I'm just saying, like, there's some questions that are really basic that people don't know the answer to. And if we can't figure these answers out in the current time when we have mountains of data, it's very hard. You can imagine just impossible to do so 500 years ago when you essentially have zero data.
Some of the theories suggest it's to do with the climate, and others suggest it's to do with better nutrition.
Yeah, better nutrition. All sorts of stuff.
Okay, folks, we're going to end it here, inshallah. The professor is here, so if you have more questions, you could come up to him and ask him, but for logistical reasons, we have to end it here because my volunteers are waiting right outside over there. And so, inshallah, on your way out, you'll see the volunteers will direct you, please sit down, and you'll be served freshly made pizzas. Okay, inshallah.